Smoke drifts across a plain where 1,000 fires are burning. The nearest one burns low, a few steps away, and beside it stands a man in a bronze helmet, Achilles, watching the dark between this camp and the walls of Troy. The firelight lies warm on one side of his face, the other side belongs to the night. An old poem counted the fires on this plain, 50 men at each, and said they looked the way stars look around a bright moon, when the air is still and every headland stands out, and the heart of the shepherd is glad. Achilles knows how his own story ends. His mother told him long ago. 2 roads, a long quiet life with his name forgotten, or a short life with a name that never fades. He chose. The choosing is long finished, and that is why a story with an arrow in it can be told this calmly beside a fire. Tonight is the whole of that story in the order it happened, from his mother's wedding on a green mountain to the mound above the strait. Nothing left out. Close to 2.5 hours of it told slowly. And the fire is not scenery. A small kept light like this one is burning somewhere in every hour of what follows, and one is still burning at the very end. Tonight, in other rooms and other countries, other people are lying in the same dark, listening while their own lamps go out. If you like, leave a small trace of your night. Say where you are listening from and what your clock shows there. My voice will keep to this fireside quiet, and nothing ahead will raise it. Nothing here asks to be remembered, and nothing waits to be solved. No part of the night needs you awake for it. If sleep comes early, let it come. The fires are kept either way. Before any of this, before the camp, before the fires, before the walls across the plain, there was a wedding, high on a green mountain in the north, and every god came to it. The mountain is called Pelion, and it stands over the sea in Thessaly, with its feet in the water and its head in beech forest. And on the day this story truly begins, the paths going up it were full of guests who do not usually walk on paths. The bride was Thetis, a goddess of the sea. The old poem calls her silver-footed, because that is how she came up out of the water. A gleam first, then a woman, the way moonlight comes up a wet stone. She was beautiful enough that the 2 greatest gods there were, Zeus of the sky and Poseidon of the sea itself, each wanted her for his own, and neither would give way to the other. And then, quite quietly, both of them gave way at once, and let her be married to a mortal man instead. The reason is worth telling slowly, because the whole of tonight rests on it. There was a prophecy. Some said one goddess spoke it, some said another. The old sources do not agree, and there is no need to settle it here. What the prophecy said was this: the son born of Thetis will be stronger than his father. A man can hear that and feel proud. A god cannot afford to. Zeus had taken the sky from his own father, who had taken it from his. That is how power moved in their family, father to son, by falling. So the 2 great gods looked at the loveliest bride in the sea and thought about sons, and stepped back. Carefully, the way a man sets down something that has started to hum. Her son would be stronger than his father. Let his father then be mortal. Let the boy be a wonder of the world, and let the world hold him, and not the sky. The man they chose was Peleus, a king from the plain below the mountain. The most God-fearing man, the poet said, in all that country. One very old telling adds that he had to hold her to win her, down on the shore, while she turned in his arms into water and into fire and into things with teeth, and that he simply held on until she was a woman again, and willing. Other tellings pass over the courtship in silence, and tonight can leave it as one sentence, already finished, like weather that passed before we arrived. The wedding was held on Pelion, outside the high cave where Chiron lived. The old centaur, the wise one, the teacher, half horse and half man, whose home smelled of herbs hung up to dry. The gods came up the mountain and sat down on the grass like guests at any country wedding, which is a thing worth lying still and picturing. The lords of sky and sea and harvest and war, seated in a meadow, passing food, in no hurry. The muses sang. Apollo himself played the lyre for the bride and groom. And years later, in the middle of a bitter argument over this very story, Hera would remind him of it, the way family remind each other of weddings. You were there. You sat at the feast. You brought your lyre. Even gods keep that kind of memory. One of the guests wore a garland that held slipping sideways over one ear all afternoon, and nobody straightened it. That is what a good wedding is like, even for immortals. There were gifts because there are always gifts, and two of them matter to every hour of this night. The first was a spear. Chiron had gone up to the very summit of his own mountain, cut an ash tree there, and made from it a spear for Peleus, tall as a roof beam, heavy past the strength of ordinary arms. The old poem says plainly that in the years to come, no other fighter among the Greeks could even lift it. It leaned, in this story, against many walls and waited. The second gift came from Poseidon, and it was a pair of horses, Xanthus and Balius, a gold horse and a dappled one, foaled, the poets said, by a storm spirit to the west wind himself, so that what pulled their master's chariot was, on its mother's side and its father's side alike, weather. Immortal horses, given to a mortal king. Both gifts will still be here at the end of tonight. Nothing given on that mountain was wasted. In time, a son was born, and his name was Achilles. And here the knight can set one thing straight, gently, because most people have heard a different version. The famous story, the mother dipping her baby in the black river of the dead, holding him by one heel, leaving that one dry place where death could enter, was written by a Roman poet 1,000 years after the old poem, and the old poem knows nothing of it. Homer's Achilles has no charmed skin. He bleeds when he is cut, like any man. The poem shows it happening. And the older story is the more tender one. Not a mother who armoured her son against everything except one heel, but a mother who could not armour him against anything at all, who knew from the beginning the two roads his life could take, the long, dim one and the short, shining one, and who stayed close to him anyway, all his life, the way the sea stays close to a shore it knows it cannot keep. She knew, and the knowing did not make her leave. That is the whole of her story, told early so that nothing later needs to surprise. When he was small, she will have watched him sleep the way any mother watches, and the sea at the foot of the mountain rose and fell all night, and none of what was coming had come yet. The mountain is still there. Pelion stands over the Aegean today, with beach and plain forest down its eastern shoulders, and chestnut and oak on the west, and the villages on its slopes are joined by old cobbled mule paths that go up under the trees, step by shallow step, made for animals carrying loads slowly. In one village there is a plane tree said to be 1,200 years old, which would make it young for this story, and the bare summit ridge shows two seas at once, the open Aegean on one side, and on the other, a gulf so sheltered it lies like a floor. People walk up there now with water bottles and come down before dark. The meadow where the gods sat is not marked, because nobody knows which meadow it was, and that is probably the best way for a meadow like that to be kept. Night comes early under beech trees. On the evening this chapter leaves behind, the wedding fires up by the cave would have burned down slowly, the way outdoor fires do, one guest after another rising and going, the songs spacing themselves further apart. And at the end, a single tended flame, someone keeping it company with a stick, not to make it brighter, only to keep it. One small light on a dark mountain over a dark sea. The same small light this whole night is going to carry, hour by hour, all the way down to the water. Let the mountain hold it for now. It knows how. South of the wedding mountain, a slow green river crosses a plain of sheep country, and the King's Hall that stands above that river is where Achilles grew. The country is called Fire, and the river is called Spurcase, and in that house the boy was not raised alone. There was a second boy at the long table, a few years older, quieter, watching the younger one the way older boys watch when they have decided to be kind. He was not a brother, he was not a cousin. How he came to be there is a story the household told in a low voice, and it can be told that way now. His name was Patroclus, and he came from a town called Opus, far to the south. When he was still a child there, he had been playing at knucklebones with another boy, the little polished bones children have gambled with for as long as there have been children. And the game turned into a quarrel, and the quarrel turned into a blow. And the blow, in the way of terrible accidents, was the last thing that ever happened to the other boy. No one called it murder in the grown sense. The poem itself, when Patroclus finally tells it, says he was a fool child and did not mean it. But the old law was the old law. The boy could not stay where the dead boy's family had to see him at the well. So his father took him north, along the coast and inland to the green valley, and set him in front of Peleus. And Peleus did the thing that made everything afterward possible. He took the boy in with honor, raised him in his own hall, and gave him to his small son as a companion for life. That is why a stranger's boy ate at the king's table, and the friendship that began there, an exiled boy with one unspeakable afternoon behind him, and a bright small prince with his whole fate already written, became, in time, the axle of the entire war, though neither of them would have believed it, sitting on the threshing floor throwing knucklebones in the sun, which of course is what they did, because boys with a history like that between them either never touch the game again or make it entirely their own. The house gave Achilles his teachers. An old kinsman named Phoenix, himself an exile taken in by Peleus, taught the boy what a king's son needed: to be a speaker of words and a doer of deeds. The poem keeps that phrase, and it is a whole education in 9 words. And there is an older, higher schooling in the later tellings, the one most people have heard, that the boy was sent up Pelion to Chiron, the centaur from the wedding, to learn hunting and music and the names of healing herbs in the very cave outside which his mother was married. The oldest poem gives the mountain schooling barely a nod, and the fond details, what the centaur fed him, how fast he could run, belong to writers who came long after. Tonight keeps both pictures, lightly. A boy on a mountain learning the lyre from a creature half horse, and a boy at home in a hall learning to speak so that men listen. They are both good pictures. Neither needs to be the only true one. In that same hall, one small thing was always growing: his hair. Peleus had made a vow to the river that ran below the house, to Spurcase, who was not scenery, but a god, a neighbour, practically kin. "If my son comes home to me from the war that is coming," the vow said, "his long hair will be cut and given to your waters, and he will sacrifice 50 rams without blemish at your springs, where your precinct is, and your fragrant altar." 50 rams. at the place where the water comes cold out of the ground. It is the kind of vow a father makes when he wants the river on his side. And so the boy's hair grew, year after year, uncut, a promise the family wore where everyone could see it. There was nothing solemn about it day to day. A boy with long hair is just a boy with long hair. One of his sandals, the summer he was 12, was mended with a thong dyed a different colour than the rest, and nobody in the story ever mentions it again. And that, more than any prophecy, is what a childhood is made of. But the two roads were real, and in that house everyone came to know them. His mother had told him, and the telling was never a secret, the way such things are secret in colder stories. Stay home, and the life would be long. The river, the sheep runs, suns, the slow silver of an ordinary kingship, and then a name that faded the way all names fade. 2 generations of being spoken, and then the quiet. Or go to the war already gathering across the sea in everyone's talk, and the life would be short and would not fade, not ever. That was the bargain the world was offering, laid out as plainly as bread and a knife on a table. The sea goddess, his mother, came and went from the house all his boyhood, up from the water, silver-footed, and back into it. And the poem lets it be seen that she was already grieving, years before there was anything to grieve. She mourned him alive. Some kinds of love do that, and it is not weakness. She simply had knowledge that mothers are not usually given, and she carried it up and down the beach between visits, and she stayed kind. When the time finally came and the ships gathered and the messengers reached the Green Valley, there was no trick that could have hidden him and no argument that could have held him, because the choice had been made long before by the person whose choice it was. He went with his hair still uncut, on the small chance the river would collect its due after all. Patroclus went with him. That last part never needed deciding at all. The valley they left is still there, and still green. The Spokea still comes down from the western mountains and crosses its plain to the sea, through farmland now, past poplars, under a sky that in summer hazes white. The mountain wall of Othrys still stands along the north of it, oak forest and bare stone, 1,700 meters of it, with cold springs on its slopes that run in the same places they ran when the vow was made. There is no palace to visit. Ploughed fields do not keep palaces. But the shape of the country, a slow river, a sheltered plain, mountains on the light's far edge, is exactly the shape a boy would remember from a ship going away, and remember again at the very end of things, when a river's unpaid due was the debt he minded most. Evening in that valley, then and now, comes the same way. The mountains go blue, the river keeps a last band of brightness after the fields have lost theirs, and in the farmhouse windows the first lamps come on, one here, one across the water, small and steady. In the king's hall it would have been the hearth, banked for the night, kept the way this story keeps its one small light, and 2 boys asleep in the same room, one of them dreaming of nothing at all, and the great spear from the wedding leaning in the corner, in the dark, patient, still too heavy for anyone in the house but the man who was given it. "9 years later, the ships that carried them lie in a long row on a foreign beach, and the war has become a place where men live. The crossing, the first landings, the slow years of raiding up and down the coast, all of that has already happened by the time the old poem chooses to begin, and it can stay behind us tonight as it stayed behind Homer. 1,000 black hulls, drawn up stern first on the sand with props under their bellies. Huts built along them out of driftwood and hide. Paths worn between the cooking fires. 9 years is long enough for a camp to have lanes in it, and habits, and boys turning spits over the fires who were not born when the fleet sailed. One of them, on the evening this chapter opens, turning a spit slowly and watching the fat drip, thinking about nothing, the way boys tending fires have always thought about nothing. Down the tide line, past the last of the fires, an old man is walking away from the camp, alone. He walks like a man who has just been refused something, and he is exactly that. His name is Chryses. He is a priest of Apollo from a town down the coast, and he came to the ships carrying a ransom and wearing the god's own woolen bands on his staff to buy back his daughter, who had been taken in one of the raids and given as a prize to Agamemnon, the high king who commands this whole beach. The army murmured that the old man should have her. A priest is a priest, and the ransom was good. Agamemnon sent him off with hard words instead. So now the old man walks by the edge of the loud grey sea, out of everyone's hearing, and says a prayer into the sound of the water. A modest one, as prayers of the powerless go. He reminds the god of every roof he ever built for him, every thigh piece ever burned. He asks that the ones who shamed him pay for it. Apollo heard. The poem says he came down from the peaks like nightfall, with the arrows rattling on his shoulder, and for 9 days a sickness moved through the camp. The mules and the dogs first, then the men, until the smoke of the burial fires stood along the shore day and night. It is a terrible thing told the way the old stories tell terrible things. From a distance, already over. 9 days the arrows fell, and the camp grew quiet around its fires, and men looked at one another across the cooking smoke and said nothing useful, because there was nothing useful to say. On the 10th day, the army gathered in assembly to ask the only question armies know how to ask, which is, what has gone wrong and who must fix it? A seer stood up and named the cause. The god's priest had been shamed, and the god's anger would lift when the girl went home unbought. Agamemnon raged. Kings do not enjoy being corrected in public. But he agreed to give her back on one condition that undid everything it settled. If he must lose his prize, he would take another man's. And the man he chose was Achilles, and the prize he took was a woman named Briseis. She has her own small story, and the poem never forgets it, even when the men do. She came from a town called Lyrnessus in the hills south of Troy. When the town fell to Achilles' raiders, she lost her husband and her 3 brothers in a single day, and was carried to the ships as spoil, and given to the man whose war had emptied her house. What she found in his hut was, by every sign the poem gives, gentler than what she had any reason to expect. And it was Patroclus, the poem says later, the kind one, who used to dry her tears and promise her a real place in the world again. When the heralds came to lead her away to Agamemnon's quarters, she went, the poem says, unwillingly. One woman walking the length of a beach between 2 men's tents, because 2 kings could not both be first. Wars turn on smaller hinges than anyone likes to believe. Achilles let her go because the assembly's rough law said he must. Then he did the thing that shapes every hour left in this story. He laid his sword belt down, in effect, and stepped out of the war. Not a threat, not a bargain, a withdrawal. He would not fight, and his men would not fight, and the beach could learn what it had been leaning on. He went down alone to the edge of the grey water and wept where no one could see it, and called into the waves for his mother. And she came, up through the water like mist standing off the morning sea, the poem says, and sat down beside him and heard the whole of it. What he asked for, and what she agreed to carry to the highest throne there is, was strange and hard. Let the war go badly. Let the king who shamed me feel the weight of every ship I am not defending. Thetis rose to Olympus with the request, and made it the way small goddesses petition great gods. She knelt, took hold of Zeus's knees with one arm, and touched his chin with her other hand, the old full gesture of asking that cannot be refused without cost. Zeus was silent a long time. The favour cut against his own wife's side of the war, and the household politics of heaven are the one thing in it that never rests. Then he bowed his dark brows, and the hair moved on his immortal head, and great Olympus shook. That nod was the whole answer. From here on, for a long while, the tide of this war runs against the Greeks. And it runs that way because one man asked his mother, and his mother asked the sky. The beach where all of this happened has been argued about for a long time, and there is a bay on the Aegean side of the strait, a chic bay, the archaeologists call it, that many think held the fleet. Better shelter than the open mouth of the Dardanelles, a day's walk from the walls. What is certain is the water itself. The current in that strait runs always one way, out of the Black Sea toward the Aegean, 3 and 4 knots of it endlessly. A ship under oars had to fight it, and sailors learned to come up to it at dawn before the wind woke. Whoever beached 1,000 ships in this country did it somewhere the water allowed, and the water has not changed its mind in 3,000 years. Evening settles on the camp the way it settled all 9 of those years. The assembly ground empties. The herald's errand is done, and everyone is pretending, in their separate quarters, that the day was smaller than it was. Down the long row of ships, the cooking fires are banked one after another, each crew keeping its own small light against the dark. And the last fire in the line is the one outside the hut of the man who has stopped fighting, burning no differently from the others, tended no less carefully, warm on the hull of a ship that is not going anywhere. The sea turns over in its sleep. The night takes the beach gently, fire by fire, and keeps them. With Achilles out of the war, the beach learned what it had been leaning on, and by the time this chapter opens, the learning has become desperate. The Greeks have been pushed back to their own ships, and the High King has decided, at last, to apologise. It is night again on the plain, the same night, in fact, that the poem's most famous fires burn on the Trojan side, the 1,000 watchfires from the very beginning of our evening, because for the first time in 9 years, the Trojans are camped outside their walls, close enough to attack the ships at dawn. The camp of the Greeks lies in its lanes and listens to the enemy's horses cropping grass in the dark. Fear at that hour is a quiet thing. It sounds like men not talking. In Agamemnon's hut, the great men eat without much appetite, and old Nestor, who has outlived enough quarrels to know the price of them, says what everyone has been thinking. This began the day the girl was taken from Achilles, and it will end when the taking is unmade. The king agrees the way proud men agree, all at once and extravagantly. He names the peace price out loud, and it is enormous. 7 tripods, 10 bars of gold, 20 cauldrons, 12 prize-winning horses, 7 women skilled in fine work. Briseis herself returned, with a great oath that he never touched her. And beyond all that, if they live to see home, a king's daughter in marriage, and 7 cities to rule. It is the kind of list a man makes when he is buying his way out of having been wrong in public. 3 men are chosen to carry it up the beach. Odysseus, the cleverest voice in the army, huge Ajax, the steadiest, and old Phoenix, the same Phoenix who taught a boy in Thyre to be a speaker of words and a doer of deeds. The choice of Phoenix is the tell. Somebody in that hut understood that this was not a negotiation, but a family matter. The three of them walk north along the edge of the murmuring sea, past the banked fires of crews they know, and as they come up on the far end of the line, they hear, of all the sounds that beach could have offered them, music. Achilles is sitting in his hut with a lyre, a beautiful one, its crossbar solid silver, lifted from the sack of a city in the years when he still fought. And he is singing. The poem even says what kind of song: the famous deeds of men, the old heroes, the kind of songs that will one day be sung about him. Patroclus sits across the fire, silent, waiting for his friend to finish so that he can take the next verse. That is how such songs were passed across a fire, turn and turn about. The deadliest man of his generation, on the worst night of his army's war, is making music about other men's glory, with his one companion listening. Whatever anger is, in its 9th year, it apparently sounds like this. He sees the three figures in his doorway and is on his feet at once, genuinely glad. These are, he says, the dearest men in the army to him, angry as he is. And before a single word of business is allowed, he feeds them. He sets the wine strong, spits the meat himself. Patroclus tends the fire and the bread. Guests are guests, and the sacred law of the table does not care what quarrel stands outside the door. They eat in the firelight, wine cups leaving their overlapping rings on the board, and only when the meal is done does Odysseus lift his cup, drink to his host, and lay out the king's whole glittering list, item by item, ending with the one argument he thinks cannot fail. If the gifts mean nothing, then think of the men, who will honor you like a god if only the ships are saved. The answer takes a long time, and it is one of the great quiet speeches of the world. Achilles is done pretending. The same death comes, he says, to the man who does much and the man who does nothing. He has watched brave men and cowards earn identical graves for 9 years. Cattle can be raided and tripods won, but a man's life does not come back once the breath is out of it, not for any list of gifts. And then he says the thing the whole night has been resting on, openly, to their faces. My mother told me I carry 2 fates. If I stay and fight here, I never go home, and my name never dies. If I sail home, my name dies, and I live long. And tonight, he tells them, he means to sail. Let them watch his oars on the strait at first light, and learn what the king's friendship is worth. Old Phoenix, who held him on his knee when he was small, and cut his meat for him, and was patient when the child spat the wine back, weeps openly and begs. He tells his own story first, how he came to Tyre an exile and was given a home, the mirror of another boy's arrival years later. And then an old tale about an old hero named Meleager, who also sat out a war in anger, and also refused the gifts, and went back in at last for love alone, when the gifts were no longer on the table. The moral is offered gently, and lands where morals from a tutor usually land, heard, held, and not obeyed. And the answer softens by exactly 1 degree. Stay the night, old man, and at dawn we will decide together whether to sail. Then Ajax, the plainest and largest of them, says the plainest thing. Men accept blood price even for a killed brother. This is a girl, and the gifts are 7 times her worth. The whole army waits on one man's temper, and the answer softens 1 degree more and stops. I will not fight for Agamemnon. But when Hector cuts his way down the line of ships to my own hulls, and fire stands over the sterns of the Myrmidons, there, at my own door, I will stand. The night's arithmetic settles where it settles. The envoys walk back along the dark water, carrying an answer that is a no, wearing the clothes of a maybe, and behind them the lyre does not start again. There is no ruin to visit from that conversation, no place with a sign, Huts of driftwood and hide do not survive 3,000 years, and the beach itself has moved as beaches do. What can still be done on any calm evening on that coast is the walk itself. North along the tide line in the dark, with fires on the right hand and the strait's steady seaward current sliding past on the left. The same water, the same sound of it, the exact acoustics through which 3 worried men once heard a silver-strung lyre and stopped to listen before knocking. The sea has kept the walk, if not the door at the end of it. Late that night, the camp finally sleeps, badly, the way camps sleep before mornings they dread. In the last hut on the line, the fire is banked down to its steady core, and the lyre lies where it was set aside when gladness interrupted the song, and 2 men who both know what was refused tonight lie listening to the same water. The great spear from the wedding leans in its corner, untouched through all of it, patient as furniture. Along the whole dark beach, the kept fires breathe, one outside every hull, small and constant, and the night passes over them slowly, minding its own long business, and lets them burn. Across the plain from all of this stands the city, and the city has a man carrying it, and this hour of the night belongs entirely to him. His name is Hector, eldest son of the old king, and the poem keeps one whole afternoon of his, an afternoon inside the walls in the middle year of the war, the way a family keeps one photograph safely apart from the rest. It can be walked through slowly. The city he comes home to, up the paved ramp and in through the great gate, is not a camp. It is a place that was old before the ships came. The palace of his father Priam has 50 chambers of polished stone in it, built side by side, where his sons sleep beside their wives, and across the courtyard 12 more chambers for his daughters and their husbands. A family the size of a village, under one roof, around one hearth smoke. Hector comes in from the fighting with his helmet still on, and the household flows toward him the way water flows toward the lowest point. Wives and sisters asking after brothers, mothers asking after sons, and he answers what he can answer and keeps walking. His own mother, the Queen, meets him at the stair and does what mothers do first everywhere on earth. She offers him something, honey-sweet wine, to pour for the gods, and then a cup for himself, because wine restores a tired man. And he refuses it, gently, with both of his reasons showing. A man just in from that field cannot pour an offering to the Lord of the Sky with unwashed hands, he tells her. And as for drinking it, he is afraid it would soften him, afraid he would remember how tired he is. She has carried that refusal ever since, somewhere, the way every mother carries the small kindnesses her children would not take. What he asks of her instead is the errand this visit is really for. Gather the older women, take the finest robe in the house, and lay it on the knees of the goddess Athena in her temple on the height, with a vow of 12 heifers, and ask her to have mercy on the town, the wives, the small children. So the queen goes down to the storeroom where the cloth is kept, and the poem goes with her, because the poem loves rooms like this. The chests hold work from Sidon, embroidered by Sidonian women across the sea, brought home years ago in the ships of Paris on the same voyage that brought Helen. And the robe the queen chooses is the largest and the loveliest, and it has been lying at the very bottom of the chest all these years, under everything, and it gleams, the poem says, like a star. The best thing in the house, kept lowest and longest, kept, it turns out, for exactly this, the city's greatest asking. The priestess Theano lays it on the goddess's knees. The vow is made, the temple is quiet, the smoke goes up, and Athena turns her face away. The poem says it in 5 words and moves on, and so will the night. The answer was no, and the city below the temple went on setting its tables anyway, because that is what cities do. Hector walks on to his brother's house and finds the war's whole cause at home on a quiet street. Paris is in his bedroom, sitting with his armor, turning the curved bow in his hands, handling the shield and the breastplate the way a man handles tools he is ashamed of. Helen sits near him among her women, directing the needlework. She speaks to Hector with a bitterness pointed entirely at herself. The names she calls herself are hard ones. And then she says the strangest, truest thing anyone says in the whole poem. Zeus gave us this fate, she tells him, so that in time to come, we shall be a song for people not yet born. She was right. This is that song. And she knew she was in it while it was still being lived. And the knowing made her sad and did not save her. And she asked Hector to sit and rest beside her for a while. And he would not, because one house remained, his own, and his wife was not in it. Andromache had taken their small son and gone up to the tower over the gate, sick with fear from the day's news. And there, where the wall walk meets the sky, the poem sets the gentlest scene it owns. She comes to meet him with the baby in the nurse's arms, and she smiles at him through everything she knows and lays her whole case before him. Achilles killed her father, she says, sacked her hometown under the wooded mountain, killed her 7 brothers in one day among their cattle and their pale sheep. Her mother died soon after. You, Hector, she says, are father to me now, and mother, and brother, and my strong husband besides. Have pity on us, and fight from the wall, and do not make your son an orphan out of honor. It is the best argument anyone makes in the entire war, and everyone who has ever loved a brave person has made it since. He answers as gently as a no can be answered. The shame before the men and the long-robed women of Troy would be past bearing. He was raised to stand first. And then he reaches for his son, and the baby cries. Astyanax, the hope of the whole city, takes one look at his father and shrinks screaming into the nurse's shoulder, terrified of the bronze face and the great horsehair crest nodding down over it like something alive. And his father and his mother, in the middle of a war, on the worst tower of the worst wall, burst out laughing. Hector lifts the helmet off his head and sets it on the ground, all gleaming, empty, a frightening thing turned harmless at a stroke, and takes the boy and kisses him and swings him and prays over him the prayer every parent knows the shape of. Let them say one day, this one is better far than his father. Then he gives the child back, and Andromache is laughing and crying at once, and he strokes her face and sends her home to the loom and the distaff and the ordering of the house. She goes, turning around again and again all the way, and the women of the household mourn for Hector that evening while he is still alive. The poem says it plainly, because everyone on that stair knew, without one word, what everyone in this story knows. In her rooms the loom stood waiting, with the distaff leaning against it exactly where she had set it when the fear took her up the tower. And she picked it up, and the thread went on. The tower they stood on has a candidate. At the dig on the mound called Hyzarilic, the walls of the 6th city still stand in courses of squared limestone, leaning back into the hill with that unmistakable slope. 9 meters of them once, with a great tower footing at the south gate. And the south gate is the one the archaeologists match to the poem's famous gate, the one all of tonight keeps returning to. There is a wooden boardwalk now, and gravel paths, and wind off the straight combing the dry grass on the ramparts. And the visitors walking there in the afternoon light put their hands flat on stones that were warm before any of the names in this story were spoken aloud. Evening comes to the city the way it comes to the camp across the plain, unhurried, one street at a time. In the great house of the 50 chambers, the lamps are lit at the usual hour, filled and trimmed and set in their niches, one small kept flame outside each door along the corridor, the whole sleeping family strung together on a thread of little lights. Somewhere below, a helmet stands empty on a shelf, facing the wall. The city breathes slowly. The lamps burn on and are tended, and last the night. The no that Achilles gave the envoys held, and the war came on past it, day after day, the way water comes on past a stone. The Greeks had built a wall of their own across the beach by then, a rampart with a ditch, to do for them what one man used to do. And in the days after the embassy, the fighting reached that wall, and then it was over the wall, and then it was in among the ships themselves. 9 years of war arriving all at once at the last place there was. On the afternoon this chapter opens, smoke is beginning to stand up from the stern of a beached ship at the far end of the line. Fire had reached the fleet. That was the mark Achilles himself had named, the door of his own hut, and it was not Achilles who rose to meet it. Patroclus came to him, weeping. The poem gives the tears a whole simile of their own. He cried, it says, like a spring of dark water that runs down the face of a cliff too steep for goats. And what he asked for, standing there in the doorway, was not that his friend relent. He had given up on that. "Send me," he said. "Give me your armor and your fresh myrmidons, and let me push the fire back from the ships, and the Trojans will see the gleam of you and think you have returned, and that alone may be enough." It was the idea of the old tutor Nestor, planted days earlier, and it had been growing in the kind man's chest the whole time. Achilles said yes. He set his own conditions: drive them from the ships and no further. Do not carry the fight to the walls of Troy. The honor of ending this is mine to lose. And then he opened his hut to the man he loved best, and armed him with his own hands. Piece by piece it went on: the greaves, the corselet, the sword, the great shield, the helmet with its horsehair crest, the same crest that had frightened a baby on a tower once, on the other side of this story. Everything of Achilles fitted Patroclus, near enough. One thing stayed behind, and the poem stops to say so: the spear. The ash spear from the wedding on the mountain, cut at the summit of Pelion, which no other fighter among the Greeks could lift. It leaned where it always leaned, and Patroclus took 2 ordinary spears instead. And that is the whole difference between the 2 men told in furniture. The borrowed armor could make him look like Achilles. Nothing could make him carry what Achilles carried. The chariot was yoked. Xanthus and Balius, the wedding horses, wether on both sides of their bloodline, and beside them in the traces a mortal horse, Pedasus, spoil of a captured town, who ran with immortals and kept up. A groom had left a rein end hanging within reach of the gold horse, and it had been chewed soft over the months, the way horses do to leather when the waiting is long. The waiting was over now. The Myrmidons formed up, eager as wolves, the poem says. Achilles poured wine to Zeus and asked the only thing he had left to ask: glory for his friend, and his friend back safe. And the poem, which never lies to us for effect, says at once, quietly, that the Father of Gods granted the first half and refused the second. We are told the ending before the going out. The old story does it that way on purpose, and tonight keeps the custom. Nothing that follows needs to startle. What followed, told from the hill's distance where it belongs at this hour. The plan worked. The Trojans saw the armor and broke from the ships. The fire was quenched. The beach was saved by the sight of a man who was not there. And Patroclus, with the day running downhill in front of him like a road, did not stop at the ships. Perhaps no one could have. he drove the route across the plain, and in the middle of it he met Sarpedon. Sarpedon was a king from Lycia, far to the south, fighting for Troy, and he was a son of Zeus. And Zeus, watching from the mountain, seriously weighed breaking the world's rules to lift his boy out of the battle, and said so aloud. And Hera answered what heaven always answers. Every god has mortal children on that plain, and if one is spared, all must be. So the father of gods and men did the only fathering left to him. He honoured the death. The poem says rain fell out of a clear sky in heavy drops like blood, the sky's own grief. And when Sarpedon had fallen, at Patroclus' hands, as the fates had it written, Zeus sent Apollo down to take the body up out of the dust. Apollo washed him in the river, far from the fighting. He anointed him with ambrosia, dressed him in clothing that does not perish, and gave him to 2 brothers to carry, Sleep and Death, the twins. And Sleep and Death bore the king home through the air to wide green Lycia, to his family and his rights, the gentlest journey in the whole poem, given to a man the moment his war was over. 5 centuries later, a Greek painter set exactly that scene on a great wine bowl, the 2 winged brothers lifting the body with the tenderness of stretcher-bearers. And people have been standing in front of it ever since, being quieted by it. 3 times after that, the poem says, Patroclus stormed up onto the very shoulder of the wall of Troy, higher than the plan had ever reached, and 3 times Apollo himself pushed him back with immortal hands. And the 4th time the gods spoke aloud and told him plainly the city would not fall to him. He yielded then, but the day had gone too far to be called home, and what came at dusk came in 3 parts, the way his own dying words would count them. A god struck first, Apollo, unseen in a mist, a blow between the shoulders that rang the helmet off his head and undid the corselet's clasp and shattered the borrowed strength around him. A young Trojan he never saw, but a spear in his back and ran. And Hector, finding him already broken, finished what was already finished. The poem does not make us stand close, and neither will the night. What it gives us instead is the voice, Patroclus, with what breath remained, telling Hector that he had conquered a man 3 others had beaten first, fate and the god and the boy, and that Hector's own death was not far behind him and was already on its feet. Then the poem says the thing it says of every man it loves. His soul went down to the house of the dead, mourning its own going, leaving its youth behind. The armour of Achilles was carried off the field on another man's shoulders. The body of the man who wore it, the Greeks fought over until dark and brought home. By full night the beach was quiet again, saved and grieving both at once, and no one had yet carried the word to the last hut on the line, where the fire outside the door was banked and tended by men who did not know what to say to each other, and burned low and steady the way kept fires burn, and threw its small light on an ash spear standing untouched in the corner, too heavy for any hand that remained, waiting now for the only one that could lift it, which was on its way to the worst news of its life. The sea kept its own counsel. The fire held. The news went up the beach slowly, because the young man carrying it kept having to stop. Antilochus was his name, a runner, a king's son, and the message he had been given to carry was the one message nobody in that camp could imagine saying out loud to the man it was for. The poem watches him go the whole way, hot tears on his face, and watches him arrive, and gives him the mercy of needing only a handful of words when he gets there. Patroclus is down. They are fighting over the body. The armour is taken. What happened then, the sea heard before the sky did. Achilles took dust from the ground in both fists and poured it over his head and face and fouled his tunic with it and lay down full length in it. The poem says he lay in the dust like something felled, and the women of the household came out and beat their breasts around him. And Antilochus did a thing that has been read for 3,000 years as the truest small act in the whole story. He knelt and held Achilles' hands, both of them by the wrists, and did not let go. The poem says why he held them, for fear of what grief in its first hour might have done with them. He held on until the worst of that hour had passed through. And then the cry came, one sound, out of the centre of a man, and it went out over the water and down through it, fathoms down, to a silver cave at the bottom of the sea where his mother sat among her sisters. She heard it the way mothers hear, and the sea began to mourn before the camp had properly begun. Thetis wailed, and around her the daughters of the old sea god gathered. The poem names them one after another, a rosary of sisters, Glauce and Thalia and Cimodoce, Spio and Thoe and wide-eyed Panope, and on, more than 30 of them, until the cave was full, and they beat their breasts, and Thetis spoke her grief aloud. She called herself, in one long Greek word, the unhappiest mother of the best son. She had borne, she said, the flower of heroes, raised him like a sapling in a rich orchard, and sent him out in the ships, and she would never welcome him home again into the house of Peleus. And while he still lived, and while he still breathed, she was going to lose him. She knew it as fact. And even so she rose up out of the cave with all her sisters around her, parting the wave to go and hold what could still be held. She rose with all her sisters around her, and the wave parted around them, and she came up out of the water onto the beach where the ships lay in their long row. She found him and took his head in her hands, the way she had held it when it weighed nothing, and heard the whole of it. The friend dead, the armour lost, and the one thing her son now wanted, which was Hector, whatever it cost. Both of them knew exactly what it cost, because the fates had tied the two deaths together. Hector's first, his own soon after. She said it to his face, and he did not flinch from it. "Then let me die soon," he said. The words are in the poem, plain as bread. She did not argue the point, being unable. She only asked him to wait one night, until morning, when she would bring him new armour from the god of the forge himself. And she went up to Olympus to beg it, a mother running an errand against a deadline only she could see whole. He could not fight that evening, weaponless as he was, and he could not do nothing, with the body still out there in the dusk being pulled at. So the goddess Athena did for him what could be done. She hung her own storm shield about his bare shoulders, and set a cloud of gold burning about his head, like a signal fire on a hill at nightfall. And he walked out to the ditch, no spear, no helmet, nothing in his hands, and stood there and shouted 3 times. The poem says the sound of him, with the goddess's voice inside it, moved through the Trojan lines the way panic moves through cattle. And in that turning back, the Greeks drew the body of Patroclus out of the press and laid him on a litter, and brought him home to the hut he had walked out of that morning in borrowed bronze. Somewhere out on that same darkening plain, a chariot had been standing still for hours in the middle of a war. The immortal horses, Xanthus and Balius, Weather's own children, had planted their feet when they understood their charioteer was down and would not move. Not for the whip, not for coaxing, not for any hand on the rein. They stood, the poem says, the way a carved pillar stands over the grave of a dead man, heads bowed to the earth, and they wept, hot tears running down to the dust from under the yoke pad, their manes spilling forward and fouling in it. Horses that could not die, mourning a man who could. And Zeus looked down from the mountain and saw them, and pitied them, and spoke to himself the saddest, gentle sentence in the whole poem. "Poor creatures," he said, "we should never have given you, ageless and deathless, to mortal men. Of all things that breathe and move upon the earth, nothing anywhere is more sorrowful than man." Then he put strength back into their knees, and they shook the dust from their manes and carried the empty car home. In the hut, they washed the body, warm water first, heated over the fire in a great tripod cauldron, then the olive oil, then clean linen laid over him from head to foot, the women doing the oldest work there is by lamplight, slowly, because this work has never once in the history of the world been hurried. And among the women, in the days that followed, was Briseis, returned at last, the quarrel's whole cause, brought home to a hut with a bier in it. The poem gives her its lament. She had lost a husband once, and 3 brothers in one day, and it was Patroclus, she said, who would not let her weep alone in those first weeks. Patroclus, who kept telling her it would be made right, that there was a place for her still. "You were always kind," she said to the body. That is her whole speech, very nearly, and the poem lets it stand for every gentleness that ever went unrecorded. When the washing was done, a basin of water stood by the bier going slowly cool, and nobody poured it out, and nobody used it, because the person it was warmed for had no further need of warm things. That night the camp grieved the way camps grieve, in low voices around fires that nobody let die. Inside the last hut on the line, lamps stood at the head and the foot of the bier, trimmed and filled and watched in turns, because a body is never left in the dark while it is still in the house. The sea, which had heard it first, lay quiet under the stars. And the light at the bier was kept burning until morning, the way every light in this story is kept, by someone sitting up with it, so that someone else can rest. While the camp sat up with its dead, far above it, in a house of bronze on Olympus, the one god who is never idle was working late. And this hour of the night belongs to him and to the thing he made. Hephaestus, the smith of heaven, the lame god, the maker, was moving among his fires when Thetis came to his door with salt water still on her, and the welcome she got there is one of the warmest scenes in the old poem. He came limping to meet her at once, quick despite the bad legs, calling her dear and honoured, and his wife set a silver-studded chair for her, and the reason for all that gladness the poem lets him tell in his own words. The singers say, and the smith himself says it here, that when his mother cast him out of heaven, long ago, ashamed of his lameness, it was Thetis and one other sea goddess who caught him in the waves and hid him, and kept him 9 years in their cave under the ocean, where he learned his first craft, making brooches and cups and little curved pins at a sea forge while the tide breathed outside. "Whatever I have," he says, "I owe to the one at my door. Bring me any task." So when she wept out her errand, "My son has lost his armour and his friend, and will shortly lose everything else, and I cannot stop any of it, but I can dress him for it." The god of fire set down what he was making and gave her the whole night of his hands. The forge came alive at his word. 20 bellows he had, and they worked, the poem says, at his thought, breathing hard when the work was hot and soft when it was fine. And into the crucibles went bronze and tin, precious silver and gold. The smith's own stool by the anvil was worn shiny along one edge, the way a workbench wears where the same knee has braced against it for ages of the world. He braced it there again, and took up the great hammer and the tongs, and began with the shield. And here the night slows all the way down, because what he made was not a picture of war. On 5 welded layers, in metals of different colours, the lame god hammered out the whole world. As if, on the eve of the worst of it, somebody in heaven wanted the record to show everything the fighting was not. He made the earth on it, and the sky and the sea, the tireless sun and the moon at the full, and every constellation that crowns the night, the Pleiades and the Hyades, Orion in his strength, and the bear that wheels in place, and alone of all of them never goes down to bathe in the ocean. He made 2 cities of men. In the first there were weddings going on. Brides led through the streets from their chambers by torchlight, the bridal song rising, young men whirling in the dance to flutes and lyres, while the women stood in their doorways to watch. And in the marketplace of that same city, a quarrel. But a quarrel of the good kind, the kind cities are full. 2 men arguing the blood price of a man who had died, laying their case before the Ets, who sat on polished stones in the sacred circle, each rising in turn with the herald's staff in his hand to give judgment. And in the middle lay 2 talents of gold, the prize for whichever elder spoke the straightest word. The second city was under siege, ringed by 2 armies, with an ambush laid at a riverside watering place. The shield told that truth too, in one panel, and did not linger over it, and neither will the night. He made a wide fallow field, soft and rich, 3 times ploughed, with many teams turning up and down it. And whenever a ploughman reached the headland at the row's end, a man was waiting there to put a cup of honey-sweet wine in his hands before he turned. And the marvel the poem loves best is that behind the ploughs, the gold of the field darkened, the way real earth darkens behind a real blade, though the whole of it was metal. He made a king's estate at harvest, reapers bringing the grain down in armfuls, binders working behind them, boys gathering, and the king himself standing among the sheaves in silence, holding his staff, glad at heart. That is all he does in the picture, stand there and be glad. Under an oak at the field's edge, heralds were dressing a great ox for the harvest feast, and the women were sifting white barley for the reaper's supper. He made a vineyard heavy with dark grapes, the vines propped on silver poles, a ditch of blue enamel around it, and a fence of tin. One path led in, and down it at the vintage went the pickers, young men and girls together, carrying the sweet fruit in woven baskets. And in the middle of them, a boy with a clear-toned lyre played and sang the Linos song, the old vintage lament, in a high, sweet voice, while the rest kept time behind him with their feet. He made a herd of straight-horned cattle in gold and tin, streaming out from their byre at dawn toward pasture along a rustling river grown with reeds. And at the herd's edge, because the world is the world, 2 lions had taken the lead bull, and the herdsman's dogs stood off and barked. One breath of wildness, set in its place among the rest, no larger than it needed to be. And near it, for balance, he made a wide, quiet valley all of sheep, with folds and roofed huts, and nothing happening in it at all. And last he made a dancing floor, like the one that Daedalus, they say, once laid out in broad Knossos for Ariadne of the lovely hair. On it young men and girls were dancing, hands clasped at each other's wrists, the girls in fine linen with garlands, the young men in close-woven tunics, faintly gleaming with oil, the girls' feet and the boys' feet knowing the same steps, and the whole ring of them ran round as smoothly and easily as a potter's wheel runs when the potter sits and tries it with his hand. And 2 tumblers spun through the middle of the ring, leading the song. Around the very rim of the shield, enclosing the stars and the weddings and the lawsuit and the harvest and the boy singing and the dancers and all of it, he set the great stream of ocean, the river that circles the world, holding everything that is inside everything that isn't. Then, almost as an afterthought of that enormous night, he made the rest. A corselet brighter than firelight, a heavy helmet with a golden crest, greaves of pliant tin. He gathered it all and set it down before the mother, and the poem says the armor rang. She went down from Olympus with the morning, carrying it, dropping, the poem says, like a hawk from the peak, the finest work the forge of heaven ever gave to a mortal man held against her, with the whole world hammered small upon it, and one long war. Behind her, the great fires of the forge were banked for what remained of the night, drawn down to their steady red hearts the way every fire in this story is drawn down and kept. And the bellows slept, and the little worn stool stood empty by the anvil, shiny along one edge, waiting for the next thing heaven needed made. The new armour fitted as if the god had measured him asleep, and the quarrel that had held the war still for so long was set down in a single morning, like a load carried too far. Achilles stood up in the assembly and unsaid his anger. Agamemnon, in his way, unsaid the taking. The gifts changed hands, and Briseis came home to a hut that had one man too few in it. The army ate, because armies must, and armed, and in the yoke straps of the waiting chariot, on that morning of all mornings, something happened that the poem tells without one word of apology, and so will the night. Achilles rebuked his own horses. "Bring me back this time," he told Xanthus and Balius. "Do not leave me out there the way you left Patroclus." And the goddess Hera, for one moment only, gave the gold horse a human voice. "We will carry you safe today," Xanthus said, bowing his head until his mane poured over the yoke and touched the ground. "But your death stands near you, and it was not our doing, nor our slowness, that a god unmade your friend. And a god and a man will bring you down in your turn." The horse wept for what he knew, and the Furies, whose work is keeping every creature inside its own nature, gently stopped his voice. The world allows only so much of that. And Achilles answered the way he answered everything now. "I know it well," he said, and drove. Of the day that followed, the night needs almost nothing. It was the worst day of the war, and the poem gives it books. Tonight gives it a held breath. The plain emptied toward the city. The river itself, they say, rose against the man in the god-made armor, choked and furious. The one fight of the day worth calling strange. And even that, at this distance, is only weather now. A river standing up like a wall of dark water and being burned back down to its bed by a god of fire, and settling, ashamed. By late afternoon, everything that could run had run inside the walls of Troy, and the gates were barred, and one man remained outside them, standing quite still in the open ground before the gate this whole story keeps returning to, waiting for what he had killed to arrive. On the wall above Hector, his father tore his white hair and begged him in. "Come inside, my child. Do not stand alone against that." His mother wept and pleaded in the oldest language mothers have. He heard both and stayed. Shame is a wall too, and his was higher. And then, when the bronze came close enough to see the work of the god on it, Hector, the best man in this story, did the most human thing in it. He ran. 3 times around the whole city they went, past the lookout place, past the wind-bent wild fig tree, along the wagon track under the walls, and past the 2 springs where the Scamander rises, one running warm with steam standing off it even in winter, the other cold as hail in high summer. And beside the springs, the wide washing troughs cut from beautiful stone, where the wives and lovely daughters of Troy used to wash their bright clothing in the old days, in peacetime, before the ships came. The poem slows there, in the middle of its most dreadful hour, to look at laundry stones. at the smooth hollows worn by generations of linen, at one sandal print dried into the old mud at the trough's edge from some morning nobody counted. And every listener since has understood why. That is what the running was about. Not the two men, the mornings. High above, Zeus lifted the golden scales and set in the pans 2 fates of long sorrow, one for each runner, and held the balance by the middle. And Hector's day sank toward the house of the dead, and the god Apollo, who had walked beside him all his life, turned and left him, quietly, the way light leaves a room. Then Athena came to Hector's side, wearing the face and voice of his brother Deiphobus, and said, "Brother, let us stand and fight him together." And Hector, gladdened to the heart because he thought one brother of all of them had come out of the gates for him, stood. He cast his spear, and it flew true, and glanced off the god-made shield. He turned for a second spear from his brother's hand, and there was no brother there. There was no one there at all. And he understood the whole of it in one look. The vanished god, and his brother's borrowed face, and said aloud, so the poem could keep it, "The gods have called me, and death is mere. Then let me at least not die without a deed, but do something great first, for men to come to hear of." And he turned to face what was coming, and it came. And the poem does not make us stand close, and the night will not either. At the last, he asked one thing, not for himself. "Give my body back to my father and mother, for the ransom they will pay." It was refused. Grief refused it in the armor of a man. And Hector, dying, spoke his last sentence not as a plea, but as knowledge. The same knowledge the horse had wept over. "Take care," he said, "on the day when Paris, and Apollo beside him, bring you down at this gate." Then his soul went down mourning to the house of the dead, leaving his youth behind. The same words the poem used once before for the man whose death this answered. What was done to him afterward, the night will say in one sentence and answer in 3. Achilles thonged the body behind his chariot and dragged it in the dust. That day, and for 11 days after, around and around the mound of his dead friend, because grief had nowhere else to go. And the gods, who had watched everything, kept Hector. Aphrodite herself stood off the dogs by day and by night, and anointed him with immortal oil of roses, so that the dragging could not tear him. And Apollo drew a dark cloud down over him, so the sun could not wither him. And the poem says that all of it together preserved him whole, as fresh as a man asleep, so that everything rage did was, in the end, for nothing. On the walls the city grieved as one body. In a house inside the walls, Andromache had been weaving at her loom, and heard the sound the city made, and the shuttle dropped from her hand to the floor. The poem keeps the sound of that one small piece of wood, and the thread stopped. Of the 2 springs, one warm and one cold, no trace has ever been found. Archaeologists have looked for the warm spring at the mound called Hisarlik for 200 years. It became one of the site's oldest riddles, and hydrologists with modern instruments are looking still. The cold conclusion so far is that the poet may have moved a real pair of springs from somewhere else in the country, or remembered water that the earthquakes long ago shut off. The washing troughs, then, live only in the lines. And in the rust-red steel museum that now stands beside the ruins, among 2,000 chosen things, gold from before this story's own century, a carved sarcophagus with a princess's name. Visitors walk past glass cases every afternoon, quietly, the way people walk where something is being kept. Night settles over both camps the same as ever, and the plain lies dark between them, with no fires on it at all now, only the cold track of wheels in the dust, going around and around a mound. Inside the walls, the lamps are lit low, one to a doorway, trimmed small out of grief. Outside the city, under a cloud no wind moves. A man lies whole on the ground, kept, oiled like something loved, guarded like a flame someone refuses to let the night have. Even here, the light is kept. In the hut by the ships, sleep finally found Achilles. Outside, on the open sand by the sea's edge, where the waves could do the mothering, and someone he had been missing came to find him there. The soul of Patroclus stood over the sleeper's head. The poem is exact about it, and its exactness is the tender part. The same height, the same beautiful eyes, the same voice, wearing his own familiar clothes. Not a shining thing, not a terror out of the dark, just him at the head of the bed, the way a man stands when he has been waiting for his friend to come home and the friend is late. "You sleep," he said, "and you have forgotten me. Bury me quickly so I may pass the gates. The other shades keep me off. They will not let me cross the river to join them, and I wander outside the wide-doored house of the dead with nowhere to be." And then the request that this whole night has been travelling toward, spoken by a dead man to a sleeping one. "Let one urn hold both our bones, the golden two-handled jar your mother gave you. We were raised in one house," he reminded him, "from the day my father brought me to yours. Let us not lie apart. Give me your hand," he said at the end. "We shall not sit apart from our companions and take counsel together again, alive, ever. That is over." Achilles reached for him, reached with both arms, promising everything, asking only that his friend stay one moment longer, and closed his hands on air. The soul went down into the earth like smoke, with one thin cry, and Achilles sat up alone on the sand in the dark, and said the sentence the whole ancient world kept. So there is something after all in the house of the dead, a soul, a likeness of us, but no heart in it at all. It was not despair. It was a man doing inventory of what remains, and finding it not nothing, a likeness at least, a visit at least, instructions at least. And instructions are a mercy to the grieving, because they can be carried out. They were carried out royally. At dawn, Agamemnon sent men and mules up the spurs of Mount Ida, the mountain of many springs to the south of the plain, with axes and well-woven ropes, and all morning the high woods rang, and the mules picked their way down the stony paths ahead of the wagons. And they felled the high-crested oaks and split them, and the split wood smelled of resin the whole way down. And on the headland by the sea, they built of it a pyre, 100 feet on every side. The Myrmidons cut their hair for their dead man, and covered the body with the locks. And at the very last, Achilles stood apart and cut the one lock that mattered, the long hair kept uncut since boyhood for the river Spercheius, the vow from the green valley, the promise of a homecoming. He said the accounting out loud, so the river would hear it and understand. "My father vowed this hair to your waters against my safe return, with 50 rams at your springs, and I am not returning, so let the hair go elsewhere." And he closed the dead hands of Patroclus around it. The debt to the river was paid to a friend instead, which is what happens to the debts of men who know their road. and the fire took the pyre and burned all night, and men poured wine on the embers at dawn until the last of the heat sighed out of them. They gathered the white bones into the golden urn, wrapped in a double fold of soft fat, with a linen veil laid over the mouth of it, and set it in the hut. And Achilles gave the order that tells everything about what he understood by then. Build the barrow modest. Decent, he said, and no more. And afterward, when I am gone, those of the army who are left after me may build it broad and high for both. He arranged his own funeral in a subordinate clause, calmly, the way other men arranged to have a gate mended, and nobody standing there argued, because there was nothing in it to argue with. It was simply true, and everyone had stopped pretending otherwise, including him. And then, because the old world knew that grief must be given something to do with its body, he held games. It is the kindest long afternoon in the whole poem. The arena sat in a wide ring on the sand, and there were prizes out of the ships for everything: cauldrons and tripods, horses and mules and strong oxen, iron and women skilled in fine work. And the racing began with chariots, 8 contests in all before it was done, and went on through boxing and wrestling and running and the rest of it until the light went long and the shadows of the marker stones lay across the whole course. And the poem, which watched Achilles rage for weeks, watches him now with open relief, because he was princely all day. When the best driver was wrecked mid-race through no fault of his own and came in last, dragging his broken car, Achilles laughed with pleasure at the man's spirit and moved to give him second prize anyway. And when young Antilochus, who had actually won second, protested hotly, Achilles relented with a smile and gave the wrecked man a different treasure instead, so that everyone left richer than the argument found them. When 2 older kings quarrelled over a fowl in the horse race, he let them settle it themselves. And they did. And the anger dissolved into a handed back mare and an apology accepted with both hands. All afternoon, the marker stone at the turn of the course, an old weathered stone with a splash of whitewash still on it from some earlier use nobody remembered, stood out there at the far end of the dust, and the chariots swung around it and came home, again and again, the oldest shape there is, out, around and back. And at the end, one prize was left unwon, a fine 2-handled urn, and Achilles carried it across the ring and put it in the hands of old Nestor, too old now for any contest, and said, "Keep this, a treasure for you, in memory of the burial of Patroclus, whom, he said, we shall not see again among the Argives." The old man filled up with gladness and blessed him for it at length, the way old men bless, and Achilles listened to the whole blessing standing still, a gift given for no victory, in memory of the dead, to a man at the end of his strength. The games could close on nothing better, and did. The fires of that long day burned down with the light. On the fresh, modest barrow above the shore, the wind moved the new earth a little, the way it tests everything new. The golden urn stood in the hut in its veil of linen, half full, waiting for its second name, as calmly as the barrow waited to be built broad and high. Out on the dark racecourse, the whitewashed stone kept its post alone. And along the beach, the watchfires were banked and tended, small and constant, one to a hull. And the 12th night of a king's grief came down on the other side of the plain, where an old man had stopped eating and was thinking about wagons. On the 12th night, in the city across the plain, an old man was filling a wagon by lamplight, and his wife believed he had lost his mind. What had actually happened was stranger and kinder, heaven had run out of patience with grief. The gods had watched 12 days of dust and dragging, and even the ones who hated Troy had seen enough. And Zeus settled it the way he settled things, with 2 messengers sent in 2 directions. Iris went down to the city, to Priam, with word that he should go to the ships himself, alone but for one old herald to drive the mules, carrying gifts to soften the heart of Achilles, and that he would not be harmed. A guide would see to it. And Thetis went to her son, sat close beside him where he lay refusing food among his men, stroked him with her hand the way she had when everything about him was small, and gave him the other half of the same message. The gods are angry now at what rage is doing with the dead. Give Hector back and take the ransom and let it end. He said yes at once. The poem is quiet about the yes, and its quietness is the news. So be it, he said. Let whoever brings the ransom take the body. 12 days of what could not be soothed, and then a mother's hand between his shoulders, and one sentence from the sky, and the whole locked room of him swung open on its hinge. What was left was for the old man to actually come, in the dark, through an army, to the door of the man who had killed his sons. In the city, Hecuba the queen fought the journey with everything she had. You will be killed, she told her husband. That man will show you no pity and no shame. Let us grieve at home as the doomed grieve. And the old king answered with the whole of himself in one line. If it is my fate to die by the ships of the Greeks, I choose it. Let him kill me, once I have held my son in my arms and had my fill of weeping. Then he went down into the cedar-smelling treasure room with its high roof and began to count out the price of a body. 12 robes of state, 12 single-fold cloaks, 12 coverlets, 12 white mantles, 12 tunics. Gold he weighed out on the scale with his own hands, 10 full talents of it. 2 burnished tripods, 4 cauldrons, and last, a cup of surpassing beauty that the men of Thrace had given him once when he went to them on an embassy, a great treasure of the house. The poem says the old man did not spare even that. Nothing in the room was worth 1 hour of his son, and so the room emptied itself, item by counted item, an inventory read out at midnight, slow enough to fall asleep inside, which is the strange mercy of lists. 12, and 12, and 12, and 10, and 2, and 4, and 1. Before the wagon rolled, the old king washed his hands and poured wine to the sky and asked out loud for one thing more, a sign. Send me your swift bird on the right hand so that I may go to the ships trusting. And Zeus, who does not often answer so quickly, answered at once. A dark eagle came over the city on the right, the hunter kind. Its wings spread as wide, the poem says, as the bolted doors of a rich man's treasure chamber, the door's width of wings, open, passing over the rooftops. And everyone who saw it felt their hearts lift in their chests. The whole city breathed out at one time. Then the gate and the dark plain, and the old herald Idaeus driving the mules, and the family standing behind on the wall, watching the little lamp of the wagon go down into the night, mourning him already, the poem says, as if he went to his death. The lamp got smaller and smaller against the black of the plain, one point of kept light crossing all that darkness at a mule's patient pace. And the watchers on the wall stayed until they could not honestly say whether they still saw it. Halfway across, at the river ford, where the mules put their heads down to drink and the water spoke quietly around their legs, a young man was simply there, standing in the dark. Down on his cheeks the first soft beard of a lucky age, a courteous voice, a hand already on the harness. To the frightened old men, he named himself a follower of Achilles, one of 7 sons of a man called Polyctor, and he took the reins and drove, and where he passed, sleep fell on the sentries at the ditch like a change of weather, and the bars of the great gate drew themselves back. It was Hermes, of course, the god who conducts travellers, and in the end, all travellers, walking an old man through an army as gently as a son walks his father home from the field. At the door of the hut, he handed back the reins and said what gods say when the human part must be done by humans. Go in now, clasp his knees, and ask him by his father, his mother, and his child, so that the heart in him is stirred. Then there was only the doorway, and the old man went through it alone. The hut of Achilles was a king's hall in miniature. Pine timbers, a roof thatched with meadow reeds, a great courtyard bar of pine that took 3 men to drive home, though Achilles could shoot it alone. And inside, the man himself had just finished eating, and the table still stood by him. Priam came in unnoticed, small in the firelight, and before anyone could move, he was down, clasping the knees of Achilles and kissing his hands. The terrible hands, the poem says plainly, the man-slaying hands that had killed so many of his sons. Everyone in the room stopped breathing. The 2 attendants froze where they stood, and the old man spoke. Remember your own father, godlike Achilles. Old as I am old, at the sad threshold of age, with no one near to defend him, yet he at least hears you are alive, and hopes every day to see his son come home. I am wholly unblessed. 50 sons I had when the ships came, and the best of them all you killed. I have endured what no mortal on earth has endured before me. I have put my lips to the hands of the man who killed my son. And it worked the only way it could have worked. Achilles saw his own father in the old king, Peleus, far away in the green valley, waiting for a son who was never coming. And he took the old man's hand and put him gently back from him, and the 2 of them wept together in the firelight, each for his own. Priam for Hector, huddled at the feet of the man who killed him, and Achilles for his father and for Patroclus by turns, until the house was full of the sound of it, and the grief had, for one evening, nowhere further to go. The fire on the hearth burned on through all of it, tended by no one, needing no one. A good bed of embers keeps its own counsel, and it kept theirs. When the weeping had run itself out, Achilles rose from his chair and lifted the old man up by the hand. An old head, he said, and a white beard should not be down there in the dust of my floor, and set him in a chair and looked at him for a while. What he said then was not comfort of the modern kind. It was older and harder wearing. He spoke of the 2 great jars that stand on the doorsill of Zeus, one filled with evils and one with blessings, and how the god gives to some men a mixture out of both, so their life is patched, a good year, a bad one, sorrow and gold in the same house. And to some men he gives only from the jar of grief, and those the hunger drives over the bright earth, honoured by neither gods nor mortals. Even my father Peleus, he said, the gods gave splendour from his birth, wealth, a kingdom, a goddess for a wife, and one son, one only, out of season, who will not be there to keep him in his old age, because he sits here, far from home, being a sorrow to you and to your children. And you, old man, they say you were happy once, the richest lord of all these coasts and islands, with 50 sons. And the gods brought this on you, and there is nothing to be done with it but bear it. Grieving, he said, wins nothing. The dead are not warmed by it. It is the oldest consolation there is, and it consoles the way stone shelters, not soft, but out of the wind. Then he did the most necessary thing done in the whole poem. He thought about supper. And because a king cannot simply be handed bread after such an hour, he told a story to make the eating lawful. Niobe's story. Even Niobe remembered food, he said. Niobe, who lost 12 children in one day, 6 daughters and 6 sons, to the arrows of 2 offended gods. Niobe, whose children lay 9 days unburied because Zeus had turned the people of the place to stone, so that there was no one to dig. And on the 10th day the gods themselves buried them, being the only ones left to do it. And even she, emptied of everything, when the 10th day had passed, even she remembered to eat. And so, said Achilles, shall we? He rose and killed a white sheep himself, and his companions flayed and dressed it, and roasted the pieces on spits, and drew them off when they were done, and Autotomedon set out bread in fine baskets along the board, and the man who had killed Hector served the meat to Hector's father with his own hands, and the 2 of them ate together in the firelight, unhurried, because the oldest law of the house, a guest is fed, had outlasted everything either of them had done to the other. When the old man finished, he brushed the crumbs from the board in front of him with the side of one hand, the small, tidy habit of 50 years of tables, and the fire settled, and for a little while, nobody needed anything. And then came the moment the poem loves best, and tonight loves best too. They looked at each other. Simply that. Priam looked at Achilles, at the size and the beauty of him, like looking on a god at one's own table. And Achilles looked at Priam, at the noble, worn face, the white head that had dared the night plain and the army and the door, and each of them, the poem says, wondered at the other. 2 men out of one war, the oldest and the youngest griefs in it, sitting over the bones of a shared sheep in the middle of the night, filling up quietly with something that was not forgiveness, the poem is too honest to call it that, but was, perhaps, recognition. The same jars had poured for both of them. They could see it in each other plainly, and neither looked away, and the fire put its moving light on both faces alike, the old one and the young one, as if the hearth, at least, had never heard of the war. The old man asked for a bed then, and for one thing more. 11 days. 9 to mourn Hector in the house, the pyre on the 10th, the burial mound on the 11th. And on the 12th, he said, with a king's terrible practicality, we will fight again, if fight we must. And Achilles granted the whole of it. The fighting will hold back for as long as you ask, he said, and touched the old man's wrist as he said it, so the promise would have a body. As for the body that mattered, Achilles had it washed and anointed by the serving women, away from Priam's sight, out in the porch of the hut. And the poem tells us exactly why, with its unblinking kindness. He was afraid that if the father saw his son and cried out, the rage might rise in him again over the guest at his own hearth, and break the law of Zeus in the very hour of keeping it. He knew his own weather, that man, and set the scene so his best self could hold. When the body was wrapped in 2 of the fine robes from the ransom, clothed out of its own price, Achilles lifted Hector in his own arms and laid him on the wagon bed himself, and only then wept once more, briefly, and called out to the friend the night had been for, Patroclus, do not be angry with me if you hear even in the dark that I gave Hector back. I took a worthy ransom, and I will share it with you. They made the old king's bed on the covered porch, under blankets and soft purple, and the god's advice held to the end. In the smallest hours, Hermes stood again at the sleeper's head and woke him with a word about the ransom a living king might fetch if he were found there by morning, and drove him and his herald and the laden wagon quietly out through the sleeping army while the stars were still up. And at the ford of the river the god left them, and dawn was spreading her yellow robe over the whole earth as the wagon came up to the walls of Troy. The first to see it from the tower was Cassandra, and her cry brought the whole city out of its doors. That is where the night of Priam ends, with gates opening and a father home, and the promise of 11 quiet days riding behind him under fine cloth, paid for and kept. The plain those mules crossed twice in one night is farmland now, flat and open under the same enormous dark, and it grows quiet at night the way working land does. Standing on the low mound of the ruins in the evening, a visitor can watch the lights of the villages come on across it, one here, one far off, small and steady, strung out like a rope somebody once took. And it is an easy thing at that hour to put one more light out there in the mind, a wagon lamp going at a mule's pace, carrying the bravest errand of the whole war. The night lets it travel. The lamps burn along the plain until bedtime, and then the farmhouses bank their stoves, and the land keeps what it keeps. The wagon was home, the truce was holding, and for 9 days the only work in Troy was wood and weeping. They laid Hector on a carved bed in the great house, and the singers took their places around him to lead the dirges, and the women answered them in the old antiphon, voice passing to voice, like a bowl passed around a table. 3 women spoke last, one after another, and the poem kept all 3 speeches, and they are the poem's real ending. So the night will keep them too, briefly, in their order. Andromache went first, holding his head in her 2 hands. "My husband," she said, "you have died young, and left me a widow in your house, and the boy is still only a baby." And what she saw coming for the city and the child, she said in half a breath, and the night will leave veiled, because she herself could hardly bear to say it. She grieved hardest, she said at the end, because he had not died in bed, reaching a hand to her, had not left her one last word to keep at night. Hecuba went next, the mother, and her lament was strange and proud and true. "Of all my children, you were dearest to the gods, and they have shown it, the one they kept whole." And last, and this is the detail 3,000 years have refused to forget, last came Helen, the woman the war was for, the stranger, the least entitled mourner in the city, and her lament is the tenderest of the 3. 20 years, she said, since I came away, and in all that time, never one harsh word from you, not one. And when others reproached me in the halls, and they did, she says plainly, you would turn them aside and speak gently. "I weep for you and for myself together," she said, "because in all wide Troy there is no one left who is kind to me now." Every listener decides for themselves which of the 3 laments is heaviest. The poem does not rank them. It only sets them side by side, like 3 lamps at one bier. 9 days the wagons went up to the hills for timber, the gates standing open on their errand from before first light, a door left ajar all day for people whose hands were always full. On the 10th day, at dawn, they carried him out and laid him on the top of the pyre and gave him to the fire. And when the next dawn came, they quenched the last of the flame with dark wine, every ember of it, and his brothers and his companions gathered the white bones out of the ash, weeping, the poem says, with the big tears running down their faces even then, at the end of 11 days of it. They wrapped the bones in soft robes of purple, the royal colour, the sea snail purple that cost what gold costs, and laid them in a chest of gold, and set the chest down into a hollow grave, and covered it over with great stones laid close together. They heaped the barrow quickly, with lookouts posted all around in case the truth should fail early, and then they went back inside the walls and held the funeral feast in the house of Priam, glorious and sad, as such feasts are. And the poem ends. Its last line has no battle in it, and no god. Such was the funeral of Hector, tamer of horses. Of all the names the poem could have chosen to leave him with, it chose the peacetime one, the working name, the one about patience with animals. That is how the city wanted him remembered, and how the oldest war story in the world chose to stop, with a buried man being called Gentle, and everyone indoors eating together, safe for one more paid-for day. Whoever has drifted off by now has heard a whole poem and is owed nothing further. For those still awake, there is a little more road, and it goes exactly where everyone in the story said it would. The war resumed on the 12th day, as agreed, and the poets who came after Homer told of the strange grand year that followed. How an Amazon queen, Penthesilea, came to fight for Troy carrying a grief of her own. She had killed her own sister by accident, a spear cast at a deer gone wrong, and had come looking for an honourable end, and found it at Achilles' hands. And how he took off her helmet afterward, and saw her face, and mourned what he had done, the later poet says, wishing the day undone. And how Memnon came out of the east, a king of the Ethiopians and a son of the Dawn herself, in armour from the same divine forge, and killed old Nestor's son Antilochus, the same Antilochus who had once held a grieving man's hands by the wrists, and fell to Achilles in his turn, and his mother the Dawn wept for him, and her tears, the poets said, are the dew which falls on everything, every morning, still. And then it was a morning like the others, and Achilles was fighting too far forward under the walls, at the gate this whole night has kept returning to, the Sion gate, exactly where dying Hector had said it, exactly what the weeping horse had meant. And an arrow came out of the rout, loosed by Paris, steadied by the god Apollo, and found his ankle, and the appointment that had stood open since a wedding on a green mountain was kept. The late poet says he fell the way a tower falls. The knight adds only this: nothing about it was a surprise, least of all to him, and a thing long expected lands differently, on the man and on the story, than a thing that ambushes. He had traded for this morning knowingly, a short bright life against a long dim one, and paid on the agreed day. Great Ajax took the body up across his shoulders and carried it out of the press, walking, while Odysseus turned and held the ground behind them, and so the two of them brought him to the ships, one carrying, one covering, through the whole of that terrible afternoon. 17 days the Greeks mourned him, and they did not mourn alone. Thetis came up from the sea with all her sisters, and the sound the sea women made over the body was so unearthly that the army would have bolted for the ships if old Nestor had not held them. And the 9 muses themselves sang the dirge, answering one another voice to voice, and the poem of that passage says there was not a dry face on the shore. On the 18th day they gave him to the fire, and afterward gathered the white bones into unmixed wine and oil, and then into the vessel that had been waiting for its purpose across half of tonight, the golden 2-handled amphora, the work of Hephaestus, the gift of Dionysus to Thetis long ago. and there his bones were mingled with the bones of Patroclus, the two of them together in the one jar, precisely as a quiet voice had asked one night on the sand at the head of a sleeper's bed. The request was honoured to the letter. It usually is, between people like that. Over the urn, the whole army built the mound, on a jutting headland above the wide Hellespont, heaping it high and clean, so that it could be seen from far out at sea, the poem says, by the men of that time, and by the men who are yet to be. Sailors, that means. Strangers. Anyone passing. Us. Evening again over the strait, as at the start. The fires of the long morning had gone out one by one along the shore, all but the watchfires, which no camp ever lets die. And up on the new headland mound there was nothing burning at all, only the last of the western light lying on the heaped earth for a while, the way light rests on water, and then moving off to sea, unhurried, the same small brightness this story has been keeping alight all night, going where lights go when they leave, which is not nowhere. The mound is the end of the story, and the story knew it from the first fire of the evening. A headland over the Hellespont, heaped earth going grassy with the years. Under it, one golden jar, holding two boys from a green river valley, together, which is all either of them ever asked of the arrangement. The war went on without them for a while, as wars do, and the city across the plain was still standing when the mound was finished. Still walled, still watered, its own story longer than one night's telling. And the sea worked at the foot of the headland, exactly as it works there now. Ships passed. Ships have never stopped passing. What became of him afterward, the old world told two ways, and never chose, and neither will the night. The poet of the Odyssey sends another hero down among the dead years later, and there, in the grey meadow of Asphodel, he meets the shade of Achilles, and offers him the old comfort. You were the greatest of us. You rule here among the dead. And the shade gives back the most famous refusal in Greek. Do not make death sweet to me. Better the hired man of a poor farmer, alive, than king over all of this. And then, the poem is careful to say, he hears that his own son has done bravely, and goes striding away across the asphodel, glad, after all, in long strides, a shade walking like an athlete. Even in the underworld, the poem could not make him stay sad. That is one telling. The other belongs to sailors. The bones stayed under the mound, say the later storytellers, but the man himself was carried off by his mother to an island, Leuce, the White Island, far out in the Black Sea. And there he lives on, out past the shipping lanes, in a life after the war. Crews that anchored off that island at night, one late writer swears, could hear singing coming over the water, a man's voice, at ease, unhurried. And the sailors never went ashore to look, and were right not to, and simply lay at anchor listening until they fell asleep. Two afterlives, a meadow and an island, a shade and a song. The old sources disagree, as old sources should, and somewhere between the two of them, the truth got its rest. The visitors began early and never stopped. 1,000 years after the mound was raised, the story is told two ways, by a soldier historian and by a biographer. A young king of Macedon crossed the strait on his way to conquer the world, and came to the mound first. He laid a garland on it. His dearest friend laid one on the mound they called Patroclus. And the biographer adds that the young king and his companions stripped and ran to it in the old Greek way, laughing on the shore of the Hellespont, honouring a dead man with living breath. Alexander said, and more than one ancient writer kept the sentence, that Achilles was fortunate above all in this, that he had a true friend while he lived, and a great poet for his fame when he died. Then the young king went east and became a story himself, which is what happens to everyone who visits this coast with large ideas. And the mounds are still there. Along the low shore where the strait meets the open sea stand several of them, worn smooth by 3,000 winters, the tallest of them rising off the flat fields like an upturned bowl, visible a long way off, just as the poem ordered. Archaeologists have opened some and argued over all of them, and the honest answer, after 2 centuries of digging, is that no one can say which mound is his, or whether any of them is, and no one ever may. The plain behind them is farmland, quiet by dark. And at the town on the Narrows, every night of the year, the last little ferry of the day crosses the lit black water at 1 in the morning. 12 minutes over, under the floodlit walls of an old castle, back again. Riding the same tireless current the black ships once fought, carrying late workers and empty trucks, and 1 or 2 passengers standing out on deck in the wind for no reason they could name. From out there, mid-strait, at that hour, the shore lights lie on the water in long, soft lines, and one of the dark shapes low against the stars is a mound with a story under it, and the ferry's own small light crosses and recrosses the dark, kept burning, tended, the way every light in this story has been tended, all the way from a wedding fire on a mountain to here. It is very late now, on that water and everywhere. The strait keeps moving seaward, without hurry, the way it has since before the names. The mounds hold their shore, and the fields sleep. The castle light burns on the water. Which of the low mounds is his? Nobody living knows. The wind goes over all of them alike, and seems to make no distinction. And perhaps that is the mound's own last kindness. Every passing ship salutes them all. The ferry ties up on the far side. Its light goes out at the dock, one small light among the others, done for the night. The water settles. The dark comes in gently over the plain, over the mounds, over the slow, bright lines the lamps leave on the strait. Somewhere under it, 2 friends are keeping each other company, the way they always did. The night holds. The water breathes. The light on the water dims and softens and lets go. The story is all told now, and it keeps itself, the way kept things do, until morning and after it.